The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local journalism today at chly.ca/donate. Local news doesn't survive without local support.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. The president of the Yellow Point Ecological Society would like to see Nanaimo create a green industrial zone, citing examples from other Canadian communities. Dauncey pitched the idea to Nanaimo City Council on Monday, suggesting that the District of Highlands on southern Vancouver Island, as well as Red Deer and Fort McMurray in Alberta, all have provisions to create industrial areas with ecology factored into design. On Tuesday, I spoke with Dauncey about his presentation.
Yeah, so I'm Dauncey. I live in the Yellow Point Cedar area, and among other things, I am very active with the Yellow Point Ecological Society. And one of the things that concerns us is the potential loss of the lands around the Cable Bay Trail, much loved. 20,000 people have signed a petition saying, do whatever you can to save the lands around the Cable Bay Trail. So on the east side of the trail, the land is owned by a bunch of Alberta investors who want to sort of divide it up into sort of, big lots and stuff. And that's still nowhere near coming to fruition. On the left side of the trail, the land is due to be rezoned heavy industrial. It's written into the Nanaimo's new official community plan that it would be heavy industrial because, fair enough, Nanaimo is short of industrial land. But our concern is that the land, which is it's listed as a sensitive ecosystem. It's got rare plants, trees, it's got nesting birds, it's got great wildlife. It doesn't become a sacrifice zone for industry. Like Nanaimo has built all sorts of really solid principles into its new OCP about, having a circular economy and, caring for nature, caring for the ocean, that, and the people who live in Nanaimo, they love the city, but they also love the nature around the city, whether it's the sea or the mountains or the rivers, right? It's part of being in Nanaimo. So we don't want land zone industrial to become a sacrifice zone when all the other commitments to caring for the environment are forgiven and forgotten, just as written off. So last night I gave a presentation to council for the idea of a green industrial zone. And I looked at, 3 communities in Alberta where they've done just that in setting up eco-industrial parks with zoning, with regulations, in place, written into the zoning bylaws for green space protection, for having a circular economy, for avoiding industries that are exceptionally they're noisy or put out bad odors or smoke or fumes and stuff like that. So when I brought this to council 2 years ago, it kind of, a few eyebrows got raised, but nothing came of it. And then I mentioned it to the mayor again a year ago, and he said they were just overwhelmed with the need to change their zoning to allow for multiple family housing in single family zones. So they were just overworked. But now the timing is better. In fact, after the meeting, one of the councillors came up to me and said she wanted to take me to coffee to learn more about this, like what's involved. Because I wasn't allowed to speak about the actual land near Cable Bay because that's going to be the subject of a public hearing soon, and they don't like delegations on that kind of topic. But that was really what I was talking about, is when that land is going to be rezoned heavy industrial by Nanaimo Forest Products, how do we ensure that it doesn't become a sea of filth and concrete and fumes? How do we build green standards into that so that there can be walking trails, there can be areas of forest that are preserved?
So is it fair to say the thrust of your presentation and your advocacy for a kind of green industrial zone is really specifically about those lands west of Cable Bay Trail that Nanaimo Forest Products has some plans for?
Yes. I mean, that land is up for rezoning very soon. So that's immediately in the planners in tray right now. So I'm very much hoping that a template for a green industrial zone can be written into the rezoning for those lands.
What exactly do you see as being the ideal conditions on that kind of green industrial zoning? What are the things you would want explicitly to be prohibited, and how would you want it to be different from, say, like the zoning law, the industrial zoning bylaw in Nanaimo right now has 4 different types of industrial zoning, and it sort of lists different permitted uses depending on which which one of the 4 something falls into. How would you want this green industrial zone to be written differently?
So the current 4 industrial zones are 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they get zone 1 is light industrial, zone 4 is heavy industrial, and when you look for definitions, there are none. It just says heavy industry. That's all. So there's prohibitions and what's the opposite? What's the opposite word for prohibitions? Like this, when you want a positive thing, I don't know, but we'll come to that. The prohibitions would be some big obvious things, like you don't want a nuclear power plant there. You don't want garbage incineration. You don't want a liquefied natural gas plant that's flaring all over the place. You don't want stuff that's encouraging the climate crisis and making it worse. And then on the positive side, you want to either require or incentivize a combination of things like, based on a careful ecological inventory, protecting the clusters of trees where there are owls' nests and eagles' nests, protecting a Garry Oak meadow where that exists because there are rare endangered, species of wildflowers in the Garry Oak meadows. You'd want to have, walking trails for the workers in among those areas. You'd want connectivity to the Cable Bay Trail so that people can walk in and out of there. Specifically, you'd want a buffer zone, about 100-meter buffer zone between the edge of the industrial lands and the beginning of any park or public space or residences. So that, people are not living with the noise and smoke of industry, right around the corner when they thought they were buying into a beautiful, peaceful rural neighborhood, which is what the people in the regional district in Nanaimo fear immediately south of that border, because that land is right on the border between the city of Nanaimo and the regional district. Different governance. And those are the kind of things that could be written into a development permit application. So you'd make it a development permit area, which requires that for the specific kind of industry you want to put in, you've got to apply for a permit for that, and you have to answer a series of questions. For instance, if someone was putting an AI data center in, those things generate an awful lot of heat from the cooling. That heat could be used to heat an adjacent building if there was a planning put in place for energy conservation between buildings. There could be, encouragement that every building with a flat roof is covered in solar panels. To help, BC Hydro generate power. There's all sorts of possibilities like that if we start thinking creatively with a green lens instead of with a brown lens.
Now, just a few months ago, Nanaimo City Councillor Paul Manley brought forward a motion that was asking for a staff report on how the zoning bylaws around heavy industry could be changed, essentially to give council more oversight to cause certain heavy industrial uses to require site-specific exemptions. That motion generated a lot of community response, specifically from Harmac. The forestry minister spoke out essentially against it. How do you see what you're advocating for having a path to feasibility in light of what we saw with that motion? What is different about what you're calling for?
They're close kissing cousins, put it that way. They're covering very similar territory. And when I published an op-ed in the Nanaimo Bulletin around this very topic, I got a lot of very positive feedback from people. The fact that Ravi Parmar, the forest minister, wrote to the Nanaimo Council the very next day, basically saying, how dare you put any restrictions on a forest company, was frankly a kind of bullying and interfering in local affairs. Harmac it's a partly locally owned company. It's got local work for people. That's great. All power to them to do this. But you don't need to have jobs at the sacrifice of other things that people care about. We need to find a way to do this together. So there's some hard thinking that needs to go on about the kind of activities that are relevant to an industrial zone. Because right now, when I last looked at the bylaw, it just says any industrial activities. It does not put any parameters around them at all.
How do you feel this is changed by the fact that Nanaimo Forest Products has purchased this land, has presumably already plans for this? And this isn't just a situation of there's this land that the community is thinking of rezoning as industrial because vaguely there is a need to have more industrial land. This is a specific enterprise, has presumably plans for this. How does that complicate what you're calling for?
It shouldn't complicate it at all. I mean, I've got colleagues in the Yellow Point Ecological Society who really don't want the land rezoned at all. They think it should remain in a rural, fully treed status. I know that the OCP identifies a shortage of industrial land. I'm pretty sure that the majority of council are going to vote for it to be rezoned as industrial. So I'm not pushing against that wave. I'm saying let's do this in an environmentally conscious way. We don't need to make nature a sacrifice zone because heavy industry wants to move in. And if Nanaimo Forest Products is looking to the way industry is tilting over the next, 10, 15 years, there are many more green businesses and green technologies emerging than dirty ones. That is where the future is, and that's where the jobs are. It's in the high tech stuff, and and those workers want a clean environment to work in. So there's no contradiction, but with jobs, with income for workers, which is needed, and industrial land, well, there shouldn't be a contradiction. We need to pioneer a new way of doing it. And I pointed out last night that the OCP won a gold medal award from the BC Institute of Planners. I'm hoping that a green rezoning bylaw can win a similar gold medal for its excellence, right? Time will tell. I mean, it's all going to evolve over the next 2 or 3 months. This is going to come to a head one way or another. And there'll be a big public hearing and there'll be lots of people sharing their thoughts.
What do you view as sort of the green industrial uses that an entity like Nanaimo Forest Products could be feasibly pursuing?
I think, the likelihood is that, I don't know, is the truthful answer. I haven't had any direct conversation with them at all, but the likelihood is they're going to be leasing out the land to other people, other companies. And so you want to have land that's as attractive to other companies and their workers as possible. I don't know, there are lots of value added timber activities that are needed. We know that we have a huge housing crisis and we need an awful lot of units of affordable housing, cooperative housing or social housing, not regular market housing. And we know that the most efficient way to build that is by pre-manufactured timber frame buildings. That requires a large piece of land to do pre-manufacturing of, the entire units of the house, the sides, the roof, the trusses, the works. Then you ship them out and you assemble the whole thing in a day. There's an incredible video, if you dig around, of China building an 8-story building in 28 hours. Not 28 months, 28 hours they assembled the whole thing because they had an off-site factory assembling the units in advance. You get efficiencies of scale and it reduces the cost. So that's the kind of thing we should be looking for. And you need that, for one big unit for a whole city, because you don't want those things, they're quite spacious. They need a lot of space to move around. And we got the timber. Just yesterday there was footage of a whole ship at Crofton where the 120 mill workers are now out of work, watching the logs being put into a ship to be offshored to Indonesia or China or wherever. It's crazy that we're allowing, I know it gets into other topics, it's outside the Nanaimo City's control, but we have the timber, but we're degrading its use into sort of wood chips or offshore, letting it just be sent to, as whole cants or logs offshore. We could be using it to build the housing we need.
Guy Dauncey is president of the Yellow Point Ecological Society.
Midcoast Morning is part of our nonprofit newsroom project, supported by listeners like you. Keep this program on the air by funding it today with a monthly sustaining donation at chly.ca/donate. We've got tote bags and shirts if you need an incentive.
Monday night, Yellow Point Ecological Society President Guy Dauncey pitched the idea of a green industrial zone to Nanaimo City Council. Speaking with him earlier on the program, he said the inspiration for that presentation is a section of land west of the Cable Bay Trail that is expected to be rezoned as industrial. That land is owned by Nanaimo Forest Products Limited. I spoke with their CEO, Paul Sadler, for updates on what the plans are for those lands and his response to Monday night's delegation. Could you give me an update on what the plans are for the land just to the west of Cable Bay Trail that Nanaimo Forest Products has submitted a rezoning application for?
Okay, well, the lands that we're talking about here were identified in the Reimagine Nanaimo official community plan, which was approved back in July of 2022. to be developed as I-4 heavy industry lands. At the time, consultants and the city staff worked very closely together, obviously, to revision what Nanaimo's development, long-term development plans were and what was needed. And at the time, it was identified that Nanaimo was very short on properties where heavy industry can situate itself and provide high-paying jobs, help support the tax base of the community, which of course which was what we need to be able to carry on providing the services that we all depend on here in Nanaimo.
Do you have a sense of exactly what is going to go on? Like, are there already plans as for what the specific uses will be, or is that something that is going to come later?
I think we are trying to encourage forestry industry type activities. I mean, we are a pulp mill. I believe strongly in the forest industry in BC. It's been Canada is an export nation. Resources is what put us on the map, and frankly, it's what's going to keep us as a sovereign nation. We need to continue to support the resource sector in Canada, and I'm in the forest industry, and I'm a big fan of it, and I think most Canadians are too, to be quite frank. And so, first prize would be to see some sawmill type activity there. Anything to do with the forest industry would be heavily supported by us. So that's something that we'd like to see. We don't have any, nobody's knocking on the door at this moment. We don't have the lands rezoned, so we can't market the land at this point in time. So that's one idea. Another idea that's becoming more clear to us is Nanaimo's becoming a very significant logistics hub for all of Western Canada, frankly. And so there's opportunities to work with the Port of Nanaimo and other importers and exporters to move products through Nanaimo into Western Canada. And, there's a shortage of land to be able to put in the proper infrastructure to support the movement of goods in and out of this country. And so that, too, is an opportunity. But I'm not saying at this moment in time that any of this is cast in concrete. That's a bad word, given what I heard at the City Council meeting. There is no plans to cover the property with concrete entirely. We're well past the second industrial revolution here in Canada, and heavy industry can coexist with the environment, and I do think that we're living proof of that.
Did you have the chance to take in any of Monday night's City Council meeting? Specifically, there was a presentation made by the president of the Yellow Point Ecological Society, just essentially pitching the idea of kind of green industrial zones, citing some examples from other communities. In speaking with him after the fact, he suggested that he couldn't directly address it there, but really he was... his idea is largely focused on the lands that we're talking about now. Did you have a chance to take that in at all?
I did. I watched it. I watched it on my telephone while I was sitting in Vancouver Airport coming home from a business trip, and so I took it in. And I certainly noticed that at the presentation there was no specific mention of these particular lands. So I'm sort of trying to. I think the link, though, of who the delegate was, and I guess earlier ongoing, I guess resistance to the idea of the lands being zoned as I-4 is fresh in my mind. We don't disagree with the concept that industry and the environment can coexist. I think the difference we may have with the delegate who made the presentation is that his idea of industry maybe is somewhat different from ours. And again, the descriptions of the industry as I listened to the presentation, seemed to date back to the situation in 1900. Things have moved a long way since then in terms of environmental management, environment and safety management, and development of industrial parks. We're not talking about the dark ages anymore, so again, we believe industry and the environment can coexist. There are incredibly important aspects of having industrial jobs here in Nanaimo. We have to find ways of improving our tax base, and again, not just here in Nanaimo, but on the eastern side of Vancouver Island. I mean, we just lost a very important employer in Duncan that with the Crofton Mill closure. I don't know if I've mentioned this before on your show, but every pulp mill in BC probably supports $1 billion of investment in the neighboring community. We pay wages that people have mortgages out to buy homes. We pay suppliers who have business loans, and there's at least $1 billion of financing activity going on in every community because of each pulp mill in BC. So, I'm not suggesting we're going to build another pulp mill here on this site, but if the opportunity were to develop, why not? Industry is critically important to Canada's economy. Resource sector is critically important. We need to find more. We need to support it, not put handcuffs on responsible operators.
You've mentioned that Nanaimo's Reimagine Nanaimo community plan from 2022 envisions these lands as being rezoned as industrial. That community plan also has a lot of provisions around a donut economics framework and writes about policies encouraging clean, sustainable industrial uses on industrial land. How do those parts of the community plan translate into what actually happens from where you're standing? Like, do those have any impacts on you and how these decisions get made about what will be the land use?
Well, again, I mean, you can't build polluting industries anymore. There's lots of laws around that. The government has very strict emission limits on industrial activities. So this, again, going back to this sort of concept that industry is not responsible anymore. Industry pollutes heavily. Industry is going to build, cover the entire land with a slab of concrete. Those are all outdated ideas. They're ancient concepts that don't pertain to today. It's a fearful type language, and it has no basis in reality. So, that's sort of my response to I guess the threat that industry is going to destroy the environment in the Nanaimo area and going to destroy our community's beauty. Industry is part of the donut economy. You cannot have a donut without industry. So we are part of it, and we support a circular economy to the maximum that it can be developed. So it's again, we don't disagree on these basic concepts, but there is a prevailing thought among the delegate who made the presentation that they're incompatible. Heavy industry is incompatible with these objectives that were determined in the official community plan, and that is just outdated thinking. It's just not reality.
A number of documents related to the rezoning application were submitted in 2024. Is there any update on the timeline of when things could go ahead that you've heard from the city?
Well, I mean, it's a very long and complicated process. We've been working with city staff on, putting forward draft proposals, and we get feedback from the city. So it's a very iterative process. So, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of oversight by the city planning department. in terms of laying out, laying out how this development could move forward. So to be honest, I'm not certain. Hopefully, sometime this year we'll be in the final stages of getting approval for this rezoning process. But it's a very collaborative process. We're working with a number of stakeholders in the community, and looking forward to getting this thing over the finish line and getting on with marketing the land, attracting responsible tenants.
Is a fair summary of where this is at for people listening that these lands, the rezoning application has been submitted. You're hopeful something will come of that, some movement in the next year, that the land, you don't know exactly what it will be used for. Likely it will be leased out to other folks to do things adjacent to what Nanaimo Forest Products does, and that's kind of where things are at.
Yeah, and I mean, ideally, the industrial neighbors we have will be complementary to our business. We have all kinds of infrastructure in our company that can support businesses neighboring to the mill site. So, I mean, there is a lot of complementary opportunities here where we can provide waste heat. District heating systems, for instance, is something that we can support because we have waste heat to be able to do that kind of thing. So, I mean, putting industries together in one location, you can really get some fantastic symbiotic relationships where you can operate businesses with overall less energy needed, less water needed. There's all kinds of opportunities. But again, there's no point in speculating exactly what's going to go on these lands. That's what the process is. You rezone land, you allow certain uses, and then you attract the businesses to be able to use, to participate in using the lands under the restrictions that the zoning is aimed at. So again, we're a forest company. I much prefer to see a bunch of sawmills set up, or CLT businesses set themselves up, or veneer operators, or anything to do with the forest industry is what I'd love to see happen out here. But again, we're right by the port of Nanaimo. There's more and more materials moving in and out of Western Canada that needs land-based logistics systems to coordinate the movement of these materials. So that's an opportunity. And of course, we're in the green power business. So we certainly would love to continue to grow in that sector as well. So those are the obvious things that we're working on and thinking about. But you can't put the cart before the horse. So first things first.
Paul Sadler, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me on that.
Okay, Joe. Well, it was good talking to you. Thanks.
Paul Sadler is the CEO at Harmac Pacific, Nanaimo Forest Products. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and RB Fruit is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, you can email us at news@chly.ca. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
This program gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.